Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Before we begin, we have a big announcement. Based on popular demand, we are pleased to announce the launch of our dedicated Byju's IAS Hindi channel on YouTube. We hope through this new channel, we will continue helping out UPSC aspirants by providing high quality content in Hindi for free. So please express your support by subscribing to this channel, and the link for the same will be shared in the description box below. And don't forget to share this link with your family, friends, and fellow aspirants. So with this, let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper, beginning with a column from page number 7 of the Delhi edition. This column, written by two retired IPS officers, evaluates India's long ongoing battle against the Maoists. See, the Maoists, who have been waging an insurgent war against the government of India since 1967, they subscribe to left-wing extremist ideology, which was brought out by Mao Zedong during China's civil war, which eventually led to the establishment of the People's Republic of China. This left-wing extremist ideology propagated by Mao Zedong has the primary objective of capturing state power by overthrowing the government through an armed struggle, and the ideology is designed to draw strength through mass mobilization of farmers, peasants, laborers, and other weaker and oppressed classes, and it believes in waging a protracted people's war against the established authority. Under Maoist ideology, the insurgents are ready to wage a protracted war that could last years or maybe even decades, with the end objective of overthrowing the government through a violent armed struggle led by the masses. As a part of this ideology, Maoists adopt guerrilla warfare and jungle warfare techniques, and Mao Zedong himself had called upon the Maoist cadres to make use of the terrain of the region to their advantage, that is, to exploit the complex geography of remote areas and forested areas to stage surprise ambush attacks against the government forces. Hence, the Maoists of India, also known as the Naxals, they also specialize in the very same tactics which was propagated by Mao Zedong, as they draw their motivation and inspiration from the same ideological doctrine. The Maoists also believe heavily in propaganda, and they are known to carry out misinformation against the state, and they try to exploit the failures in governance, that is, the lack of development that arises due to poor administration and governance. And in order to propagate their ideology amongst the masses, they believe in communicating with their settings and with their environment. And since they even plan to form the future government, they even try to show that they are bound by certain international laws related to conflict and principles of ethics and morality. So, this strand of left wing extremism, that is Maoism or Naxalism, is based on a strong ideological foundation, and this gives the insurgents the strength to wage a sustained war against the state, which might last years together or decades together. And since they wage their ideological war through unconventional techniques, it poses a grave challenge to the internal security and stability of the country. See, just a couple of weeks ago, the Maoists carried out a deadly attack against the security forces in Chhattisgarh. And in this ambush attack, they killed around 22 Jawans, including the Cobra Commandos, who were part of an elite special force of the CRPF. The nature of this attack was clearly in line with Maoist ideology, as the Maoists were engaging in guerrilla warfare and they were exploiting the local terrain to their advantage, and they were taking the security forces by surprise by staging such ambush attacks. But apart from killing a large number of security forces, they even kidnapped one of the Cobra Commandos, but later they showed willingness to negotiate with the state, and following a round of mediation, they even released the hostage with the clear intention of further promoting their propaganda and their ideology, and to communicate with the larger setting, that is, with the Indian society, especially in the tribal forested areas of eastern India, by trying to project a good image of themselves, by showing that they are not just a brutal group committing mindless acts of violence as projected by the government, but instead it is a humane group that is bound by certain principles of ethics and morality and even by certain laws of conflict. And that is exactly the ideological misinformation that the Naxals were trying to achieve by releasing the captured hostage. So this latest attack in Chhattisgarh highlights the ideological strength that the Maoist movement in India has displayed for decades together, which has helped the insurgents to sustain their conflict for a prolonged period of time against the Indian state. The writers clearly point out that this conflict between the state and the insurgents is an asymmetric conflict because clearly the balance of power is in favor of the state. Because when it comes to the extent of resources, the number of forces, their weaponry, technology, their training, and their professionalism, the Naxals are no match to the state security forces. But despite that, the Naxals have been able to keep up their morale for decades together, and they keep surprising the central and state governments and the security forces by staging such deadly attacks. And they keep reminding the state that they are able to regroup and renew their strength, which in turn enables them to sustain this conflict for years together. The writers say that such a strong ideological war based on unconventional techniques cannot be easily defeated in the battlefield, and such unconventional wars cannot be just won with the usage of weapons and technology. Because such a asymmetric, unconventional ideological war is a battle between minds of steel, and it requires prolonged grit and determination on the part of the state to defeat this Maoist insurgency through an ideological response. See, until now, the state's response against Naxalism has been based on two pillars. One is security operations, that is counter-insurgency operations, and two is a focus on development. So to step up the state security response, the central government has supplemented the resources of the state governments by pumping money in order to modernize the security forces by providing them with modern weapons and technology and training. The states, on the other hand, have been largely unsuccessful in wiping out Naxalism, mainly because they have lacked a dedicated focus in wiping out Naxal insurgency. But of late, the center has come out with new strategies by working closely with the state governments. And on the security front, they are leading joint intelligence-based operations to target and weaken the Naxal leadership. These security operations have given some desired results, but however, every now and then, the Naxals are able to regroup and renew their efforts, and they're able to keep up their morale and motivation, and they're also able to sustain their resources, their funding, and maintain a constant stream of recruitment through which they are able to stage these frequent attacks against the government forces. So on one hand, the Indian state has dealt with the problem of Naxalism as a security problem, and it has tried to step up its counter-insurgency efforts with dedicated focus on the security forces, their training, and their modernization. And wherever the states lack the resources, the center has supplemented those resources, and they have jointly tried to win this conflict in the battlefield. But despite the success that the security forces have registered, the Indian state has still not won this conflict or defeated the Maoist ideology, because there are still other areas which deserve the attention of the state if the Naxal ideology has to be permanently defeated. Several security experts and administrators have pointed out that left-wing extremism such as Maoism is particularly linked to the lack of development, and hence the state needs to make a focused attempt to reduce the governance deficit. And they have argued that this, along with effective security operations, can get us the required victory against the Maoists. In this context, Andhra Pradesh is a unique example because amongst all the Naxal affected states, Andhra Pradesh is probably the only state which has successfully wiped out Naxalism. And the credit for this should go to special forces of the Andhra police, such as the Greyhounds, which was set up in 1989 to specialize in jungle and guerrilla warfare. And under the leadership of legendary IPS officer K.S. Vyas, the Greyhounds of Andhra Pradesh led a courageous battle against the Naxals. And in this counter-insurgency battle, K.S. Vyas had to even sacrifice his life in the line of duty. These effective counter-insurgency operations led by the Greyhounds was followed up by the Andhra government with effective grassroots development by the civil administration. Civil servants at the district level and at the grassroots levels, they provided dedicated leadership to transform the governance machinery in the region, which combined with effective security operations helped in defeating the Naxal ideology. But most of the other states, especially Chhattisgarh, Odisha, and even Maharashtra, they have all faltered because even though they have improved their governance machinery and reduced the governance deficit, they have not been able to sustain a prolonged counter-insurgency campaign against the Naxals. Because see, when it comes to such an entrenched insurgency, outside forces such as the central forces, that is CRPF, they have a very limited impact because any day in such an insurgent war, local youth who are well trained and recruited well, they will have better knowledge and they will have better motivation to fight and defeat the Naxals. That's exactly what happened in Andhra Pradesh with the Greyhounds. Outside forces, such as the CRPF from the center, can supplement the resources of the state, but however, the final battle has to be waged by local forces who are more well versed with the local terrain and the local language and customs. And since they have a higher stake in this conflict, they will have a greater motivation to defeat the Naxals. And this, accompanied with the right governance intervention, can help in defeating this ideological conflict. So for this, the state, that is both the state government and the center, they will have to persist and prevail because such unconventional ideological wars cannot be won in a short span of time. It might take years together or decades together, but eventually the state is bound to emerge victorious. And with India's ongoing rapid development and economic transformation, Naxal ideology is going to decline in the coming years. And as the local youth move away from the conflict zones and get better education and get employment opportunities, the Naxal ideology is going to weaken out. And then whatever remnants exist, they can be wiped out with the security forces, parallelly accompanied with better governance and development. So according to the writers, such a comprehensive strategy is needed by the state to win such unconventional ideological wars. And these conflicts cannot be merely won in the battlefield. Next, on page number 6, we have a column that evaluates India's transition towards a low carbon future. See, tomorrow and the day after, the United States has called for an important summit known as the Leaders Climate Summit. At this summit, Western countries led by the United States are pushing for the adoption of net zero emissions by the mid of the century. And they are pushing several other countries as well, including developing nations, to adopt net zero emission targets. And these upcoming changes in climate diplomacy poses a very complicated challenge for India. See, under the Paris Agreement of the Climate Change Convention, the global target is to keep the global temperatures under 2 degrees Celsius and if possible under 1.5 degrees Celsius. And in order to achieve this target, Western countries have taken up higher targets to transition towards low carbon economies, and they eventually plan to become net zero emissions economy in the coming decades. So prior to this summit, there has been a lot of pressure on India, which is seen as one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gases, to adopt an ambitious net zero emission target goal in direct violation of the principle of historical responsibilities and common but differentiated responsibilities. As we have discussed in previous sessions, climate action is all about a conflict between the developed world and the developing world. Because developed countries such as US and European countries, they have exhausted most of the carbon space that was available by freely burning fossil fuels for centuries together, which is the primary reason for them to become developed countries in the first place. By freely burning fossil fuels and by growing their economies, they addressed all the basic needs of human development, and hence these developed nations are responsible for historical emissions. Whereas developing and underdeveloped nations, including India, they are not responsible for any historical emissions, as their economies have started to grow only in the last few decades. And they are still faced with very serious growth and developmental challenges, which requires these countries to protect their carbon space and their carbon budget. And hence, for large polluting countries like India, the challenge is about enforcing historical responsibilities on the developed nations, wherein the developed countries are made to pay more and take up higher targets towards low carbon transition. Whereas at the same time, India should continue displaying its serious commitment towards climate action by decarbonizing its economy and by providing for greater adoption of cleaner technologies. while parallelly retaining its carbon space to continue burning fossil fuels for few more decades in order to meet its growth and developmental requirements. So, at such international summits, if India is pressurized by the other countries to adopt ambitious net zero emission targets, then India will be left with three options. One, either fall under the pressure of these countries, that is, the Western developed countries, and adopt ambitious targets, which might help India transition its economy towards a net zero emission economy. But however, this path will seriously curtail India's growth and development opportunities, and it will have a huge impact on the millions of poor people in the country. The second option for India would be to not take up any commitments which might be seen as irresponsible as far as climate action is concerned by other countries. The writer says that both the paths represent extreme steps and both the paths are not feasible for India. Because if India is forced by Western countries to take up higher targets and ambitious targets, it will compromise India's growth and development. And at the same time, India cannot continue on its carbon intensive path, which ends up polluting its environment and as well as leading to disproportionate impact of climate change and global warming on the poor and vulnerable population. So the writers say that instead of these two extreme paths, there is a third neutral path which is available to India, under which India will have to adopt a sector specific approach and lay down concrete short term goals which are achievable, which can help India strike a balance between the conflicting objectives of climate action and growth and development. To illustrate this path, the writers take up one sector as an example, that is the electricity sector. The electricity sector in the country accounts for nearly 40% of India's greenhouse gas emissions because even today, predominantly India's electricity sector is driven by coal. Nearly 75% of the country's electricity is still produced through thermal power plants that are burning coal, which thereby contribute immensely to not just air pollution but also to climate change. So, here the government can adopt a sector specific approach instead of blindly adopting a broad approach for the overall economy. And in such key sectors, the government can focus on decarbonization by capping the usage of coal for generating electricity to meet the future needs of the country, and by simultaneously focusing on improving the efficiency of our electrical appliances. See, India has definitely made a huge transition towards renewable forms of energy and clean energy. There is no doubt about it. Through solar power, wind, nuclear, and hydropower, and other forms of cleaner renewable energy, India is definitely making a big shift towards low carbon and climate friendly electricity. But however, the country's electricity sector is still heavily driven by coal, and this is where India needs to reduce its dependency on coal by decarbonizing the electricity sector in a staged and phased manner while parallelly promoting efficiency in our electric appliances. Statistics show that air conditioners, fans, and refrigerators account for one of the highest consumption of electricity in the country, and hence it's very important to come out with innovative solutions and sustainable solutions for meeting the cooling requirements of the economy. By making ACs, fans, and refrigerators more efficient, India can emerge as a champion in electric appliances and in several technologies. And parallelly, it can focus on decarbonizing the electricity sector by providing for greater adoption of renewables and clean forms of energy. India could also set up a Just Transition Commission, which will help in taking the financial burden of the poor people, that can help fund India's transition towards cleaner and renewable forms of energy. Next, through this sector specific approach, India can give more focus for structural reforms in the electricity sector by improving the finances and the overall management of distribution companies and the power producers. This will improve the overall efficiency of the electricity sector, and India can even channel these sector specific initiatives to drive a transformation in other related sectors, such as the promotion of electric transport. So, when this phased and incremental approach is applied to various key sectors, which are currently contributing heavily to India's emissions, it can help India in living up to its commitments under the Paris Accord, and it can even help India to adopt a net zero emission target within a reasonable time frame without compromising on its developmental goals. Hence, the writers conclude that India's low carbon future lies in sector led change, and through concrete focused action in each critical sector, India can drive a low carbon transformation which will help India decarbonize its economy and as well as to achieve the status of net zero emissions. Now let's look at an article from page number 1. India has responded to the recent decision of the United States and its Treasury Department to place India on its currency watch list. Just a couple of days ago, we had discussed in detail that the US Treasury Department has listed India on its currency watch list, which basically means that the United States perceives India as a currency manipulator, which is designed to benefit Indian traders to the disadvantage of the United States. In response to this designation, Commerce Secretary has responded, and India has made it clear that such designation by the US government amounts to an intrusion in India's internal policy, and India has defended the right of the RBI to intervene in the financial markets in order to stabilize the economy. And such intervention of central banks cannot be termed as currency manipulation by other countries. And moreover, India is well within its sovereign economic rights to decide upon its monetary policy and as well as with regard to its foreign exchange markets. And such actions of the United States to term India as a currency manipulator is being seen by India as a direct intrusion into its internal policies. Now let's look at the mains practice questions. The first question: in India, a sector led action based approach could provide the framework to drive low carbon transformation. Examine the statement. The second question: unconventional wars are not fought merely on the ground, they are battles between minds of steel. In the light of the statement, illustrate India's long battle against the Maoists. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. So, this concludes our discussion for today. Thanks for watching.